So we call the meeting to order. First order of business is the approval of the draft minutes from the June 2 meeting. Minutes were distributed previously by Mr. Scalati. Anyone have any questions or comments concerning those minutes? The motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of June 2nd, 2025. I'll second.
Motion approved. Minutes are adopted. Second, third order of business is adoption of the council's standard operating procedures as rules of order for this committee. How many of us have read all of them? I've tried my best. They look satisfactory to me, and it looks like we can live with them. So, does anyone have a comment or a question? Entertain a motion to adopt the council's standard operating procedures as rules of order for this thing. You have a motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All approved?
Aye.
All right. So the council standard operating procedures are adopted. Next agenda item is an engineering update. We have a bunch of engineers here today, I know. My understanding is that Mr. Varna from McSweeney can make a presentation.
That is correct, sir. Mr. Chair, I just wanted to introduce the team from McSweeney Engineers real quick. They're going to go over the scope of services for phase 1A, where they're at on that, and kind of what our next steps will be. If we can try to hold questions to the end, that'd be great. If not, I understand it's going to be some technical talk. But this team worked with the city. They're very familiar with Waterfront Park. They actually did the initial 5-year assessment that identified these issues that started this whole process. So I'm gonna let them present to you guys, and we're here. Raul Dominguez is here in the back. He's our capital improvements director. So he oversees our project management on the city's behalf. If you have any questions about the city's involvement in this process, either myself or Raul can answer that for you. Let you guys take it away. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Bill Barna. I'm with McSweeney Engineers. I'm the project manager for the Waterfront Relieving Platform Consultant Services. I'm joined by Dave McSweeney, CEO of McSweeney Engineers, and Chris Mack with JMT, who is helping with the structural analysis and modeling of the project. Go into the next slide, please. Just introduce the team. So the team involved is McSweeney Engineers. We've been working with the city since around 2013. We did the first underwater inspection in 2014, and then we've done several other projects since then. JMT is helping us with the structural engineering, the grant facilitation, permitting, and then some of the adaptive studies, sea level rise and climate change as we move forward into potential design options in the future. Davis and Floyd is doing the site civil engineering and surveying. FNME Consultants is doing the geotechnical, and then O'Quinn Marine Construction is adding some of their background in local marine construction in Beaufort to the project. So we've kind of covered all of our bases with the project team. This is what we submitted to you guys with the proposal, and everybody's got a little their own role and their own part. You can go to the next slide. I'm going to go into brief history of how we got to the point that we're at today, just so everybody has an understanding. The original construction was in 1974, according to the design plans that we have. The first inspection that we're aware of was conducted in 2003. That was the first underwater inspection, the first time that the pilings were looked at. 2008 was the park renovations, and at that time during the park renovations there was no work done to the piling. 2014 came around, was the first time that McSweeney engineers did the underwater inspection. And at that time, we noticed that there were significant issues with the piles. And over the intervening years, we advanced the project through a series of inspections, maintenance, and repair schemes. We did that all the way up until 2024, the most recent inspection that we did. We noticed that the rate of deterioration on the piling was such that ongoing maintenance was not feasible for a couple of reasons. One, because the rate of deterioration, and two, because we had been monitoring the shoaling that was occurring underneath the pier, and it was making access to those piling impossible. Not difficult, just we could not physically get to piling that we knew from previous inspections had problems with, and we were no longer able to evaluate them. So if you'll go to the next slide, I'll show you what I mean. This is a cross section of the relieving platform. You can see the piling and then the concrete pile cap, and then there's about 6 feet of fill on top of all the structural elements, and that's what makes up the promenade. And down here is a representation of the shoaling that over the years we had noticed. And as we started to see the deterioration with the piling, that rate increase with the shoaling rate, maintenance of these piles just became where it's not feasible anymore. Also, when you consider the age of the structure, it was time to start looking at, okay, what would a repair or replacement scheme look like? How much would it cost? And that's where we made the recommendation in our 2024 report to go ahead and initiate the preliminary studies that are necessary to move this project forward. So if you go to the next slide, 2024 inspection noted that we still had extensive shoaling, continued deterioration of the piling, and then some other defects above the water line. And as I stated, the recommendations, including initiating the preliminary engineering studies required to determine the safety, the serviceability, and replacement strategies, and determine the most advantageous option in terms of cost and scheduling for the city of Beaufort. That was a recommendation that we made in our structural report. That became the impetus for the RFP that was generated. And then we were successful in putting the team together and winning the RFP. So what we, again, back to the 2024 inspection, that you're fine going to the next slide. Sorry. This is an excerpt from our report plus what we had put together. This outlines the pile plan below the relieving platform. 570 total piles across, I believe, 108 bents, which are pile groups that are indicated by the vertical lines. And there's also a representation of the shoaling and then the limits of shoaling and how we've seen the shoaling increase. What was important to notice is all the piles in blue are piles that we knew from previous inspections had issues with them. We're no longer able to even physically get to them. Being up underneath the platform, I had my belly down to the mud, and my tank is banging on the bottom of the structure, just reaching to try to get to them, and you can't. So this essentially shows some of the problem areas. Some of the piles that we were able to repair are in green. Some of the ones in yellow are noted where we have what we consider significant deterioration. And then the red piling are piling that just have deteriorated to the extent that they are no longer viable for repair. Okay, so once we put this kind of 5,000 foot view picture together and looked back over the history of inspection, that's when we realized, hey, it was time to look at this structure in greater detail, because maintenance was no longer a sustainable option. You can go to the next slide. So what we proposed to the city in the RFP was a multi-phase approach to this. Phase one, and specifically phase 1A, which I'm talking about today, is just the data collection effort. Just let's get all the available information that we can together so that we can holistically analyze this structure and start to give guidance on the best path moving forward. Phase 1B is final data collection, any additional modeling that may be required to kind of fine tune and identify any other data sets that we may need. And then as we move into phase 2 is the development of alternatives, the preliminary design alternatives, evaluation of those alternatives, and then investigation into funding mechanisms. Are there going to be grant possibilities available for this? Is there federal money out there or otherwise? Phase 3 is final design and permitting, with phase 4 being construction. So what I'm here to specifically talk about today is our current scope, which is phase 1. And if you go to the next slide, that consists of, again, just data collection at this point. So we wanted to get an as-built survey, tree, topographic, and then bathymetric, so we could quantify the shoaling, really determine where the shoaling is, and all the utilities, identify the utilities throughout the park. That also required some utility coordination and subsurface utility engineering. We did geotechnical investigations. So you may have seen the barge out there. We took core samples to get an idea of, okay, what's the geological configuration below the mud line that is necessary for the analysis of the existing structure, but also to determine, okay, what would a new foundation look like on a replacement scheme or repair scheme, if that's applicable. Looking at any geospatial and other reference information that would be out there, again, just collecting all the data sets that we can and getting them combined into one place so that the whole team can go through them and figure out the best solution. And then looking at design water level estimation and the analysis, determining what are the extreme water levels, what's the current water level, what's the projected water level due to sea level rise. I believe all of us know that right now the structure in its current state gets routinely overtopped by king tides. So obviously any new structure we would want to put out of that category so that the park is not getting flooded on a monthly basis in the future or daily basis in the future. And then one of the big important things is the structural analysis of the existing structure and trying to determine what capacity the structure has remaining in it. And so I'll go down through, hit on a little bit more detail and tell you guys where we are in this phase. We're actually coming near the end. So if you go to the next slide, the as-built survey has been completed. The background is just a screenshot of that survey. It's substantially complete. We're waiting for the Bureau of Coastal Management to sign off on the critical line. Essentially, that's where state jurisdiction begins, is anything beyond that critical line. So we're waiting on that certification. But the utilities have been located and marked. The trees have been located and marked. All the hard features have been identified. And then one of the larger components was the bathymetric data, what the channel bottom looks like in front of the structure, which is substantially different than the design condition, and it's significantly different than it even was 10 years ago. So again, substantially complete on the as-built survey. Next slide. Utility coordination and subsurface utility information. That's partially to, I will say, substantially complete on that. So part of the as-built survey required utility coordination. They had to get together with the utility companies and figure out, okay, where are these utilities? Let's go ahead and mark them so that we could get them surveyed. And this is, power, water, sewer, anything else that may be in the vicinity of the relieving platform at the park. And then what is essentially left in that phase is determining, okay, if we need to build an entirely new structure, how do we relocate or bypass these utilities to minimize the disruption of utilities that service the park? So that will likely be accomplished in later phases as we come up with potential design alternatives. There will be a lot of back and forth with all of the utility providers to kind of continue to figure out what a bypass route would look like. You can go to the next phase. Next phase is the geotechnical investigate, or the next bullet is the geotechnical investigation. So for this phase of the work, we took 4 sediment samples going from the left end of the park from north to south, or sorry, from south to north. At the locations indicated there, the geotechnical investigation is substantially complete. We've reviewed the draft boring logs. If you go to the next slide, I show 2 boring logs in here. There's B1 at the south end of the park, and there is the boring was terminated, looks like about 51.5 feet below the water line. Boring 2, about the same distance below the water line. So all we're waiting on from the geotechnical investigation is the final report, and we expect that to be delivered in the coming days. So again, this helps us to analyze what's down there, what the piles are actually founded in, and what a new pile design may look like for this structure. So next slide. Cover some of the geospatial and reference information. So again, that's a broad term. It just says we're gathering every data set that we can for the local area. So this is mainly for permitting. It's determining what kind of historic, cultural resources are available in the area. Is there any archaeological concerns in the area? And then also the as-built survey is kind of lumped in with that geospatial. And then we'll also be looking at GIS data sets and the like. That's substantially complete for this phase of the work, because most of it has really been combined into that as-built survey. Where we'll be collecting more of the information, or where we'll be supplying more of that information, will be to the regulatory agencies. Really, once we get to a permitting phase, that's information that they're going to want to know. Are there any historic or archaeological concerns on the site? I believe we ran into that when we permitted the DADOC. There was an area of concern that we were able to get around. It was determined to not be an issue. So again, just more data collection and under that bullet. And then you can go ahead for the next slide. Design water levels. That's going to be a big thing to be determined throughout really in the preliminary phase, in this data collection phase. For this phase, it's substantially complete. We're looking at current water levels, extreme water levels, and then projected water levels based on information from NOAA and other modeling software that is available. With that will be wave analysis. What impacts do different storm events have on the structure? And as far as overtopping or wave run up, or just the impact of, say, a wave crashing against the structure. So the final hydrodynamic modeling will be done once we come up with some kind of alternatives, and then can actually plug those values in and say, well, here's a model of what the structure may look like, or here's a range of alternatives. We're going to apply all this hydrodynamic load to it, see how the structure behaves, and then use that to further refine the alternatives in the project. The other thing, obviously, sea level rise. That will be another thing that we'll continue to look at and vet through the models and the alternatives analysis to see where's the optimum height to put a new structure out there to give us the freeboard to where flooding of the park is no longer an ongoing concern like it is now. You can go to the next slide. The last task in this is the structural analysis and capacity determination of the existing structure. So JMT, our structural partner in this, what they did is they took the original design plans and then they built an analytical model, numerical model of each bent. And they essentially built the whole structure in the computer and then analyzed that versus the design loads, the original design loads, which were listed on the plans. It's called finite element modeling and analysis. And then what they did is they took the computer outputs and then they validated the results they were getting against the pre-stressed concrete institute's accepted spreadsheets for pre-stressed concrete piles. So they made a model, ran the analysis, looked at the results, and then compared that against industry standard design parameters from the authority on it, the Precast Concrete Institute. If you go to the next slide, the draft results are not favorable. And what we found is by plugging in the original design loads, just the live load and the dead load, the weight of the soil, and the live load, the weight of the pedestrians on top of the soil, is that it appears that the original structure was designed essentially to full capacity. The structure was designed to use up every available bit of capacity in the structural members. So what we found based on that analysis is that the outermost piles are using about 95% of their utilization. The innermost pile, the center pile, is actually overutilized by our analysis. And then the remaining piles are anywhere between 58 to 68% utilized in their capacity. So what is also important to note is that these results were based on merely the live and the dead load, the vertical loads acting on the piles. They do not consider lateral loads from current forces, wave forces, wind forces, or any vessel mooring loads. So the application of those loads would only further validate the model, and that we're seeing the results that we're getting are showing that some components are overstressed. If you go to the next slide. So as a result, and at this point, we have just received the draft of the analysis. We're still going through and looking at potential ways to refine the analysis, coupled with the geotechnical information, to see if we can put the finest point on this analysis that we can. But the draft results indicate that out of an abundance of caution, some portions of the facility may need to be closed and restricted from pedestrian access. So that is the problem right there, are the piling that look like that underneath the relieving platform. This is after we had gone in there and pressure washed the piling, removed the marine growth. You can see the pre-stressing strand exposed, and what started out as a 12-inch diameter or 12-inch square pile is closer to a 8-inch round pile at this point due to the deterioration. It's intermittent throughout the facility, but it's widespread. So for those reasons, it's likely we're going to have to implement some safety controls once we further vet the analysis, and once we do our final review of the analysis, it's likely we're going to have to do, like I said, implement some safety protocols.
Bill, I've got a major event coming up, as you know, and I don't want to rush the process of being able to pinpoint and say which areas of the park we need to close off to pedestrian traffic. But with all that being said, what is the realistic expectation of when you might have that information available?
This week.
Okay.
This, we're aware that, we're 25 days from Water Festival. We have 4th of July, the Shrimp Festival. So we just, in full transparency, I received the draft report this weekend. And so what we're doing is after reading the draft report, going back, talking to the consulting, to the geotechnical engineer, working with JMT to see if we can't further refine the analysis to give us a little better feeling for the current condition.
Thank you.
Yes, no, I do have a question. You said the only way to access those pilings is underneath.
That's correct.
So is there any way in the future, I guess, in the repair process to have top access? Like hatch locations or anything for the specific pilings?
Well, the issue becomes the 6 feet of fill that you have on top of the structure. It's, so you have concrete piles that are all in a row, and then they have a concrete cap, and that pile and cap configuration makes a vent. And then there's a concrete slab that spans from vent to vent, and then there's 6 feet of soil on top of that. In a standard port setting, like if this was a port pier, typically what they do is you just go, when you cut a hole in the deck, drive a new pile next to the bad pile and form it all up. The problem is the way this thing was designed and built to be so low to the water, what we call freeboard, it really limits your feasible access. You know, by the time you figure out, okay, well, how could we safely get the equipment out there to be able to implement this repair, and then the disruption with the repair, does any repair of a 50-plus-year-old structure, is that even feasible when you compare that versus the cost of, let's replace it with something that's going to be there for 75 years and then addresses a lot of the other issues like the flooding and such. And that was in part why we initiated this process to begin with.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
And shoaling in the beginning of your presentation. What is the material of the shoal material? What is it made up of?
It's all fine silt fluff mud.
Okay. And is it the current and the change in tides, is that what's swishing the material up into the structure?
That is my best guess. If you get to the south end of the facility towards the marina, the current rips through there. If you go to the other end, the current rips through there. In the middle, not so much, because you get a lot of friction from all the piling that are actually inside the relieving platform. And the relieving platform also has that big fascia panel on it, so you can't see underneath it. So the current is essentially stagnant in the middle of the facility. And what that does is that allows all the suspended particles in the water to settle out. I'm just based on what we've seen with the shoaling rates, we've seen it get larger and larger over the years. And as you get more shoaling, you get more shoaling. You know,
And the initial design did not take that into consideration?
to my knowledge, it did not. It did not.
Bill, can I just interject
Yes.
a comment? So the people ask, why is it called a relieving platform? Essentially, this is a wharf, okay, a marine structure used to berth vessels that's parallel with the channel versus a pier, which is perpendicular. A relieving platform, as I understood it, is relief from shoaling. So if you're looking in the cross section, if you had just a wall there, the shoaling, the slope of shoaling, and the angle of repose of the soil would begin at the wall. But when you have the berthing wall offset 30 feet and then have the retaining structure, it provides shoaling relief. Does that make any sense? So I think it was with some intention designed that. I'm assuming. Can't really speak to the designers today.
How would a new design address this shoaling problem?
We have not gotten to point yet.
That's
So that's more a question for Chris over here, who will be doing the hydrodynamic modeling. Would you?
Well, from what I've seen, when I work with the Corps, you can use control features like containment or constraining dikes and control the flow or redirect the flow so that those suspended sediments go to a different location than falling out of suspension underneath the relieving platform. Other techniques would include mechanical jets. For example, Columbus Street Terminal in Charleston uses these mechanical jets that will work with the ebb tide. And they will literally push sediments from the base of the platform out into suspension. And then those currents would take the sediments elsewhere. That's another technique, but that's what the hydrodynamic model should help inform, is what are the patterns and behaviors of the current during the ebb and flood tide conditions, where are the sediments, what's going on. Then you could just start to look at different techniques, whether you use a physical barrier or some feature to direct flows in a manner that would reduce shoaling here. And then in other cases, you could, if, for example, if the predominant source of sedimentation is coming from, say, the flood, you could put up a barrier and prevent those sediments from coming into your structure outright. It also depends on the structure that you may or may not go back with, or the retrofit you may go back with. That might be a factor as well to mitigate that. So it depends on what alternatives are proposed, whether it's another pile supporting feature, perhaps a bulkhead. There's a wide variety of options available.
Is there enough data so far to rule out any particular solutions? For example, is backfilling still a solution, or is that pretty much out of the picture based on the data we have so far? Is there anything you can rule out with regard to?
From a regulatory standpoint. So the question is, and I believe we were asked that in here before, would it be possible to come out here and say drive sheet pile and then backfill all of that? That's highly unlikely from a regulatory standpoint. It's a conversation that we can have in pre-application meetings, but it's highly unlikely that would be permissible.
I'm gonna ask, look, I'm not an engineer, so I apologize if this sounds stupid, but what about a clean out underneath and reinforcing with new pilings next to it or in the areas that are weak? Is there a way to actually clean it out underneath and make it?
Well, then you get into a dredging scenario, right? So if a dredge scenario is going to cost you $5 million and you have to continue to do that just to be able to open it up and replace it, is that a feasible solution? Again, there's a lot of what ifs here that in this phase we're not addressing. We're just gathering all the data at this point so that we can come back to you guys and say, hey, we got the answer for that question and that question and that question, and this is why we didn't go this route. This is why it was a non-starter. And then at the end of the day, to come back in here and say, we took all the available data, we took this group of experts and looked at a wide range of options, and at the end of the day, based on cost, scheduling, impact of the community, and public input, we arrived at this being the most preferred option.
I'll just add to that. That's an approach that South Carolina Port Authority does for a lot of their terminals, like Hugh Leatherman Terminal. We were fortunate enough to have a numerical model for that and analyze shoaling rates, and then using dredging as a means to deal with the accumulation is costed out. What does this look like over the next 10 years? How often are we going to dredge? Where are the available CDFs, combined disposal facilities, volume, so rates of shoaling, and then what would contrast that with how often we have to dredge and how much volume we talk about, and where are we going to dispose of it. So I would say we leave it on the table and take a look at that and compare it with these other solutions.
And I guess even going back to that, scope of work, if the areas that you identified that really need to be closed off, could that be a temporary stopgap to dredge a small portion, reinforce those sections and allow them to remain open while we figure out a better plan or a good plan? I don't know, just spitballing here.
It's something that you could look at, but by the time you had,
Do it, yeah.
right, by the time you had all the permits in place and figured out where you're gonna put the material and then went through that repair scheme and looked at that cost and that impact to eke this thing along a couple more years, is it worth it versus another more sustainable option?
So does this represent the extent of the platform? That is to say, is that how far it goes in towards the land? So
That
is it just infill under the rest of the park, like under the pavilion? There's
correct. So if you'll go down to the survey, if you'll advance a couple of slides to the as-built, go one more. So the small squares at the bottom represent the handrail bollards, the concrete handrail bollards. The relieving platform goes about 36 feet back from that location. So that puts it on actually on the other side of the promenade.
36 feet from the face of the wall back into the.
Yes, sir. So that's what this dash line is showing here that indicates the Bureau of Coastal Management critical line is along the face of the seawall, because the way that it was constructed is they built the seawall out in the marsh, and then they backfilled everything up to the seawall, and then they built the relieving platform in front of the seawall, as Dave spoke about. So that if there was shoaling up against the seawall, the vessels would still have an area to berth well outside of that shoaling area.
So primarily a cosmetic seawall.
Well, on the face,
Right.
yeah, on that fascia panel is just a panel. But what I'm saying is actually under the park, back in the park, there is an actual seawall there. And that's what you see at the marina. When you're at the marina, that is the seawall, and where the seawall is there, that continues in a straight line all the way north. What jumps out at that corner that's by the pavilion, that's where the relieving platform actually starts. They just made the aesthetic look, and it, because they dropped that fascia panel so low that you only see it when the tide goes negative, they kept that aesthetic. And so most people think it's just a seawall that goes through there. They don't realize there's 600 miles up under there.
This may not have been a part of your investigation, but since it's not a relieving platform down near the marina, are there shoaling issues down there?
So I would have to look back at the recent hydrographic survey versus the one we did in 2013, 2012. However, based on my dive inspection, based on our dive inspection in 2024, I could definitely tell that there was some shoaling along the marina seawall as well. And that was just based on field measurements that I had, and there were actually other defects in the seawall themselves, in the sheet pile panels that I could no longer locate. I couldn't figure out why until I realized, okay, well, they're just buried now. Very similar to many of the other piling that I noticed under the relieving platform.
I think it'll be helpful when you come back and talk about what areas should be closed off to the public, to kind of understand. I mean, it's very unlikely everything just collapses. Like, how many pilings can be compromised and still hold a reasonable load, and what are the scenarios? And my other question is, if we get a foot of water from a hurricane, that's infinitesimal more weight than people walking on there. Is that going to cause a critical event?
There's a couple things there, and the question is first, the structure was designed using hand calculations and based on a previous version of the code. Now we're doing a more advanced analysis using the current code. And the structure is essentially overstressed under just regular everyday loads, not considering flood loads, wave loads, vessel loads, anything of that nature. the application of those loads would only further validate our findings, right? You put more load on it, it's gonna drive it more towards the fact that the structure is overstressed from what it was originally designed for. In our best estimation, as I stated earlier, the structure was designed to capacity, to full utilization of those piles in their quote unquote good condition. And so there really is, at least at this stage, and we're gonna look back at ways to refine the analysis, there really is no way to say, well, okay, this vent is gonna be good and this vent is not gonna be good when the defects are so widespread and we haven't applied those additional loads. As far as the water level goes, while water does have weight, it also has a buoyant force, right? Archimedes' principle, bodies buoyed up by a force that's equal to the weight of the water displaced. So just because it's flooded over top of it doesn't mean that it's actually getting more stress at that time. It's a nuisance. They call it nuisance flooding. That's horrible for the structure. Anytime you take reinforced concrete and just continue to douse it in salt water, that's part of the reason why you're seeing some of these failure mechanisms, some of the deterioration mechanisms that are going on out there, because concrete, well, particularly the reinforcing steel and salt water don't mix.
Is the relieving platform tied into the retaining wall in such a way that a failure of the relieving platform would have some damage to the retaining wall?
That is something that we did note in our analysis, that it does appear that at least at the park proper, where you have the relieving platform, it appears that the way that the platform was detailed, that the platform also provides the lateral resistance to the seawall. So
Yeah, this is.
so in this case, it's kind of hard to tell in here. But here's the fascia panel that everybody sees out in the river. Low water gets down to the bottom of there. You usually can't even see up under here. It's only when it goes negative. And that seawall is way back up here in the park. From our analysis, draft analysis, it does appear that what's not shown in here is there is another concrete member in here, a strengthening member that goes in and out of the page this way. And we believe that that was in there because the relieving platform actually does provide a resistant system to the seawall, right? The seawall is holding back the earth. It wants to rotate out. The earth wants to push it out this way. And the relieving platform is actually pushing back against it to buffer that.
As noted in that representation, you'll see some of the piles are leaning as if they're pushing against, they're in compression, pushing against like a buttress. We call those battered piles, which resist lateral loads. By all indications, and this is somewhat of a puzzle because we're going back to, the era of leisure suits and disco. Those battered piles, based on basic structural engineering principles, would be, if they were to resist vessel loads, which way would they be pointing?
The other way. So what he's talking about is based on the angle of this pile and the angle of that pile, that they're facing back against the seawall, that they're providing resistance against the seawall rotating outward.
And that's an excellent question that could have very profound implications on how we move forward with a conceptual design. So aesthetics are really important, but what's also very important is how do we solve this problem without causing greater problems and unraveling? But again, this is why we're doing this data collection and getting our minds around the problem.
Go back, just for clarification, is the seawall 36 feet in from the water's edge?
From this point here to that point, 36 feet. That puts it from here to somewhere just on the left side of the of the seats.
Seawall, concrete wall.
It's concrete sheet pile. Yes, sir.
Oh, it's concrete and
It's a concrete sheet pile.
concrete sheet rock.
They're tongue and groove panels that were driven into the ground.
I got one more question. You've given the county reports as well for Broadriver Fishing Pier, and same thing, concrete is just deteriorating. Saltwater exposure, things of that nature. Is there a better building material as we move forward, or a way to encapsulate it in aluminum or something other than reinforced concrete?
Well, there's been tremendous advances in concrete mix design. There's high performance concrete. There's all kinds of admixtures that they can put into concrete now to prevent saltwater intrusion and the like, to develop higher least strength. There's all kinds of additives you can add to concrete. And then you also have just high performance concrete that's just got a much higher durability. The other thing is you can design the structure entirely without reinforcing steel. Now they've gone to fiber reinforcing steel. So GFRP is where you're using fiberglass rods instead of steel rods. You take the corrosion potential just out of the equation. And because of that, they're designing structures now that they think will have a serviceability of nearly 100 years. It hasn't been around long enough to fully validate that, but we're pretty sure we can at least hit a 75-year mark with, if you're looking at going high performance routes like that. What we did through all the city's testing and analysis that we did is back in 2016, we took core samples on some of these piles. We just drilled all the way through them, took that core to a lab, had it analyzed. What we found out was that there was a very high paste to aggregate ratio, meaning there was just a whole lot of glue, but not a whole lot of rock in the concrete pile. On top of that, there was a whole lot of air that was in that mixture. And so the best that we can figure is that when they were making 570 piles, there was a quality control issue. And that's why we see just these random piles scattered from one end of the facility to the other that just have this wide range of deterioration. You'll have one pile, you can't tell anything's wrong with it. You'll have one over, it's got severe problems, and that went back to quality control. Now processes have obviously vastly improved in the last 50 years. So that's why any maintenance scheme or repair scheme that you're looking at, you have to evaluate that short-term cost and continued short-term cost versus that longer projected lifespan.
These precast piles, the original ones?
Everything in there, everything in that structure was precast.
And what are those piles there? What kind of structure are they sitting on the foundation at the bottom, at the bed?
So the piles are of various length according to the design plans. There are layers of limestone throughout Beaufort County. And so some of them, I believe, have an H-pile stinger that's founded directly into the limestone. Some of them, I believe, are resting right on top of the limestone as the bearing material. It kind of varies throughout the
So when you
facility.
took the geologicals drilling down from the other report there, what did you hit?
We have to look at it. Can you go to, so these are again, the draft logs, and just two of them. There you go. So it looks like we were hitting bluish gray, non-plastic, well-graded sand, and dark gray, looks like it was dense sand at this location, and then over here was again well-graded sand and dense sand. So where these particular borings were taken, it doesn't appear we hit any of the limestone. When we did the day dock, the piles for the day dock that are out in the river, we definitely hit it because we were not able to get the split spoon sampler to penetrate any further.
Refusal out there.
So we were hitting refusal out there, and I think a lot of that has to do with deeper, just the way that the stratification of the soil layers go.
I have a question from Mr. Scalati online. He says, what is the difference as far as regulatory processes in terms of backfilling versus replacing?
The difference is you're looking at filling wetland, what would be considered filling wetland. Whereas the structure, and Chris, you worked for the Corps, so that the big difference is you're looking at the difference between what is considered shading, which will be a pile supported structure, and filling, which is a completely different regulatory process. It's significantly harder, more regulatory work to fill a wetland of this magnitude than it would be to do a pile supported structure.
He says, and if you can answer, does Sackett versus EPA ruling change this?
I don't know enough about that ruling to comment on it, honestly.
I've heard about it, but yeah, you have to look at it as a compensatory mitigation. If you start dealing in the wetlands, it gets very, very complicated and expensive. It can't be done. That would probably be a good consult with the permitting agencies, the Corps, BCM, and get a preliminary opinion from them.
Regardless of what option.
Well, just by an example, years back, members of this team were involved in Union Pier. And the proposed development there involved new structures that needed additional piles through the existing platform or deck. And put together an individual permit on that, I recall, and it set off a firestorm with several environmental groups that ultimately curtailed that project from advancing forward. And again, from the developer then's perspective, this is an existing structure over water. I'm just putting additional piles next to existing piles. I don't understand why there would be why the concern over environmental impacts. But again, I wasn't directly involved with that project. Dave, were you?
No, I wasn't. But to your point, Chris, in the alternatives analysis, which we'll get into in a later phase of this project, certainly, and I've heard this sentiment echoed by several members of this committee and other people in Beaufort. Why can't we just fill it in? We've had a bridge replacement in southern Beaufort County. Why can't we just fill it in? We can't. This is the simple answer to that. We could try, we put it as an alternative analysis, just like we could have alternative A, do nothing. I mean, we know we're not going to do that. Alternative B, close to do nothing in terms of cost to benefit would be fill. The pros of fill, I think in some people's minds are misguided for the reason, well, it'll be filled and it'll never have to do anything with it again. That's absolutely untrue. You must retain fill that requires a structure. Any structure requires maintenance. So if you have maintenance of two structures and they're alternatives, and one is a huge regulatory hurdle, one that's also very expensive because fill is not free, then that might lead to a platform as a better alternative. A platform perhaps with materials that have greater longevity due to the advances in the last 50 years of reinforced concrete that doesn't utilize corrosive, potentially corrosive elements like steel rebar, or quality control advances, or high performance concrete that is much less permeable than the concrete that was utilized in 74. So just wanted to bring that up. Thank you.
one way or the other, on that note, and to Dave's point, we're gonna have to analyze the alternatives for a couple of reasons. One, we're gonna look at all the options so we can get the citizens of Beaufort the best product at the end of the day, right? That's part of filling our scope, and that's why the city hired the experts to help figure it out. Number two is the regulatory agencies are going to require us to provide an alternatives analysis and say, hey, did you look at this? Did you look at that? Did you look at this? Because they have to make sure that in accordance with all their regulations, that they have done their due diligence as environmental regulators and looked at, okay, well, have you really looked at all the potential alternatives and ways to mitigate any of the negative environmental impacts? And so it's a balance for us of, hey, let's do what the client wants and get it done as easy and as quickly and as cheaply as possible with the highest quality, but balance that against regulatory concerns. And it's a balance, and sometimes it's a battle. We like to keep it in the balance category, but that's just the truth of it.
That concludes your presentation at this point.
It does.
I have one other question and then a comment. And that is, do you have, for planning purposes, a timeline for the rest of the engineering work?
This phase is going to be completed by the end of the summer, is when we're gonna have all the final reports in and compiled for our data collection. And then so that will be phase one. When we roll right into phase two, we haven't determined a timeline for those yet. Like I said, we're just in this phase. Ideally, we were hoping that we had all this reserve capacity left in the structure, and it was gonna give us a lot of time to move forward. That appears, at least preliminarily, at least in this draft, that does not appear to be the case, based on the draft structural analysis. So I would imagine that had we had a schedule already that defined out when we were gonna get all the way to construction, I would imagine that schedule would shrink, but we have not gotten that far yet. The regulatory alone for this could be significant, will be significant for sure, regardless of any option. And that's after you get the alternatives analysis, preliminary design.
We're currently on schedule according to the Gantt chart schedule that we submitted. And yes, as Bill said, that schedule shows the final completion of phase 1A at the end of the summer, I think September. I'm not sure the exact date. I don't have it in front of me, but early to mid-September, and we should be on track to do that. We are currently contracting this phase, so the next step would be to develop a cost proposal that's reviewed by y'all, recommended for approval or not, and then move on to the task we just described: the alternatives analysis, design development, schematic design, the numerical modeling of water levels, and the associated tidal and wave forces as we go towards and much public input. Of course, at that point, that we would be also engaging the desires of Beaufortonians to what they want it to quote look like, this new structure or portions thereof.
Did you say that the other phases are not contracted yet?
No, they are not. We are contracted in
Just
phase
phase one.
1A.
What about just 1A?
1B, there's an allowance in that contract for phase 1B. So we do have a mechanism to finish 1B. Or to also use that potentially in phase 2 if we were to have money left over in that phase. That allotment, that allowance, I should say.
It's important to understand that we set it up like this in phase 1A is to find out, okay, what information is available, what do we need to gather to be able to gather that information together, have a preliminary understanding of what's feasible, and then be able to go back to the city and say, based on all the available information, it's gonna take this level of effort to advance the design to all the alternatives analysis and preliminary studies. There was no way to fairly for you guys or for the team to come up with the cost associated with that without first getting all the data together. And that's why the contract is scheduled, is structured like it is to where this phase one is merely just the facts, right? That's all we're trying to do is just get the data together in one area so that our team can sit down and go through it and say, okay, where do we go from here? What are going to be the 3 or 4, 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 best options to look at? And then how do we assign that level of effort amongst the team, determine a cost, and then come back to you guys, which is fairly standard of a project of this magnitude.
Bill. For those of you who are present in this meeting, either physically or remotely, who wish to comment or have a question concerning this engineering presentation, there will be an opportunity for public comment toward the end of the meeting, of this meeting at the end of the agenda.
Can we be issued a copy of your presentation?
Yeah.
Can we get it? Yeah, so we can see the different phases, what they're made up of. And the data are shown on this page.
Along that note, the request for the PowerPoint presentation, has everyone been able to access the SharePoint site that was set up? I know.
He helped me.
You were able to.
Yeah. Hey, I'm actually gonna take this, I gotta go to another meeting for county council, so.
You're familiar with our communications.
Yeah.
We will have the rest of the 20 documents updated into the SharePoint. For access for the entire community. And you all have gotten email from me. We also have a Word document in there called committee questions and requests. You have any questions, concerns that pop up after outside of these meetings? We'll just log those in that document so we can track those requests and make sure we're getting those answered. And those answers will come to the entire committee, not just the individuals. This is Ashley Brandon, our public information officer.
I neglected, right at the outset of this meeting, to have the roll call. And better late than never, I guess.
Tracy's got you taken care of most of the time.
Tracy.
It's when she's not here that we get lost.
Maybe I shouldn't have admitted that I made a mistake. All right, I'm sorry. All right, JJ, go ahead.
No, you're good, sir. This is Ashley Brandon. She is our public information officer. She's just going to go over different communication strategies and resources that this committee has available to them from the city. Some of the things that we're already engaging in and recommendations that we have, just to make sure the committee knows what's available and what we can do on your behalf to engage with the citizens, business owners that utilize Waterfront Park moving forward, because public engagement, participation, and feedback is going to be a big part of the decision-making process when we get to those options that the engineers just talked about. I'll turn it over to Ashley.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. So to begin, we wanted just kind of a byline to start with. So this communication strategy is here to support the advisory committee's mission for evaluating the condition of the waterfront park and recommending improvement, specifically regarding infrastructure, community use, and the lease with safe harbor marinas. We want to ensure transparent, inclusive, and consistent communication with the public, city staff, and all the stakeholders for downtown. So to begin with, we have key communication goals. That is to unveil the park's current status, of course, to share the current conditions and challenges we're facing here at the waterfront park in a very clear and easy to understand way for the public. To also engage in meaningful dialogue, foster these conversations with the residents, the business owners, and all the downtown stakeholders. and to build trust through transparency. So we want to include inclusive feedback and support decision-making. And so the key stakeholders and audiences are, of course, our waterfront park neighbors and residents, citizens living within proximity to the park. You also have the safe harbor leaseholders and the marina users who utilize and have direct interest in the marina facilities, civic groups and nonprofits, which are our local organizations, and environmental groups and community associations. You also have the downtown Beaufort business owners and employees, our stakeholders in downtown Beaufort, which are our retail shops, our restaurants, and commercial stakeholders, business owners. Tourists and visitors, of course, we are a massive tourist destination, so that also has to be taken into consideration. They're also our stakeholders, and our general public and taxpayers, of course, the Beaufort residents. And then so the thought is to have multiple public listening sessions, multiple public meetings, scheduling 3 to 4 public meetings across different days and times so that, you know, if someone's working, they can come to one after hours. We also have some during business hours so that everybody can come when they want, when they are available. We also want to connect neighboring communities. So the city of Beaufort residents as a whole, we don't want to also just focus on downtown residents. It's the city of Beaufort's parks. So that's our residents' parks. And then our downtown business stakeholders. So we want to host one session geared towards our stakeholders downtown in partnership with Main Street Beaufort, Baja, the Chamber of Commerce, all of the city's stakeholders that will need to be brought in for that.
As the Beaufort Area Hospitality Association, they represent all of our tourist and hospitality industries, restaurants, and bed and breakfast, lodging.
So our tactics and channels, of course, we want online engagement. So when we're ready to put out a survey about what the residents would prefer to see, we'll be using platforms like SurveyMonkey, which is a survey that's sent out over email, where people can open, click and choose their answers to the survey, and we'll leave that open for approximately 4 to 6 weeks. We will promote this on our city homepage, our city website. We'll promote it through all of our social media platforms, as well as the newsletter I put out monthly, as well as quarterly. So stakeholder collaboration. We want to work closely with our downtown operations team to identify key business stakeholders, distribute these printed materials, survey flyers, and help facilitate attendance at stakeholder meetings. We're looking also to schedule joint briefings with the Beaufort Area Hospitality Association and the Regional Chamber of Commerce as well.
And members of the committee with us and online, if anyone doesn't know her, I'm sure she knows everybody. Linda Roper, our downtown operations director, is present at the meeting. She'll be a big part of this communication strategy as well because of her existing relationships downtown.
So our messaging pillars, of course, at the top is transparency. The city is committed to openness and how this process is handled. We want to make sure that is the top priority. Inclusion, we want to make sure all voices are heard. Those who live and work downtown matter to us. We want to make sure they're included. Stewardship, the waterfront park is a key asset. So of course we want to protect and improve it. And partnership, so city seeks collaboration with our community stakeholders. Advisory committee recommendations to the city council. Once all public engagement efforts, technical reviews, and stakeholder discussions are complete, the Waterfront Park Advisory Committee will compile a comprehensive set of findings and recommendations to be presented to the Beaufort City Council. So these would include synthesizing public input, survey results, stakeholder feedback from the summary, a formal presentation delivered to City Council outlining findings, options, and specific recommendations waterfront park improvements. You'll have a technical assessment integration incorporating our engineering reports, our environmental studies, and financial feasibility analysis into the recommendations. And a final written report submitting comprehensive document with supporting data, budget considerations, and implementation of timeline suggestions. Advisory committee recommendation package. The advisory committee will use all of the above to formulate a clear, prioritized recommendation package, which will include phased construction or repairs, a strategic timeline for implementing the necessary infrastructure improvements and repairs, potential design and use changes, suggested modifications to park layout, the marina, and the public space. Lease amendment suggestions for the marina operators and vendors. And funding strategies, so proposed budget approaches, potential grant opportunities, and public and private partnership models. And a proposed implementation timeline will accompany all of these recommendations.
We really wanted to make it abundantly clear to the committee that city staff is available to assist with all of this. And Ashley is our public information officer, communications director for the city. She has a background in communications, putting this type of information together, scheduling these types of events. So as the committee progresses through their meetings and gathers more information, please let us know what we can do to support the communications effort, engagement of the public, and just know we're here to support the work of the community.
We have at the moment, one deadline or maybe two deadlines we're looking at. That is, as of October 1, we're supposed to have a preliminary report draft. And by the middle of October, that's to be presented. Do you have a proposed timeline for all of the other work that you've outlined?
Now, that will come as the committee gathers the information and, again, the work that the engineers will be doing, the engagement with Safe Harbor about the marina lease. We didn't want to set deadlines to all of that until we could meet with the committee. We didn't want to give you guys deadlines. And we were operating in the dark on all of the information we needed, especially all of you hadn't even been formed yet. We wanted to give you all that opportunity to work with you directly to establish those timelines.
And I'll say, Joe, if you don't have information that you feel is substantial enough to report at the time that you're required to report it according to the resolution, I'm sure there can be some flexibility there. I don't think council wants information just for the sake of information, but they want information that they can use to help form their decisions. And so that's going to be a very flexible process as we go forward, depending on, what are you looking at? You're looking at options for repair and you want recommendation from the public on that, or you're looking at lease options where they want out of their marina, which is a subtopic of the whole thing. So this is a committee that will be standing for a while. It's not just a 3 months or 6 months of non-committee. In my mind, this committee will probably persist for 2, maybe 3 years or so until we get all these situations associated with Waterfront Park Iron. So it's not a race. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, I think based upon what we heard today, it's going to be very hard to make any recommendations for a while, given what we heard and given the scope of what may have to be done.
Well, David, the word that we should take out of this meeting is flexible.
Fair enough.
At this point on the agenda, we will entertain public comment. That would be comment from anyone who's present here, either physically or remotely, who would like to, not other than members of the committee, who would like to comment or have questions on what's been presented here today. Hearing none. Any other business?
Mr. Chairman, your next meeting, as I understand it from the ones that we scheduled when you met last month, previously this month. The next meeting will be scheduled for September 1st at 5 p.m. But if I understand the engineering team correctly, they may have some more complete information to share prior to that.
I believe the next meeting is going to be on August
4th. August 4th. Even so, it sounds like they may have some substantial information prior to that. Is there an appetite on the part of the committee to meet once that information is available? That's why I'm asking the question. So,
Well, I think what the city manager is suggesting is that before August the 4th, it may be appropriate to have a further engineering presentation.
It may be, and so, I guess what I'm asking is it acceptable if I contact you when we have that additional information? And as the chair, you make a decision with regard to whether to call a meeting or not. Fine.
All right, if there's no further business, is there a motion to adjourn this meeting? I can make motions before.
I'll make motion.
The motion to adjourn, is there a second?
Second.
Wasn't paying attention.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned.